All right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been in the news a lot lately, and a listener actually asked about. We're talking about missile defense.
It's a hot topic, and for good reason, with all the new technologies and global tensions. And of course, the listener specifically asked about the Golden Dome Initiative, a very ambitious plan.
Yeah, Golden Dome. So before we get into that, though, we need to lay the groundwork,
Right.
give everyone a good understanding of how missile defense works, what systems are already out there.
Exactly. We need that context. And for this, we've actually dug through a ton of sources.
Oh, yeah, we've got reports, analyses.
SpaceNews.com had some good stuff on Golden Dome itself. There's the Arms Control Center, the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance.
Britannica.com was really helpful for the historical background. And of course, we can't forget the news outlets.
Right, gotta have those facts straight. Reuters, CBS, all those guys.
Plus, some insightful reports from think tanks like the Washington Institute.
So what we're going to do is present, a clear picture based on what we've read, obviously. We'll talk about the different types of missile defense systems, what they're meant to stop, how they work, how well they've done in tests, and even in real-life situations, and, where they fall short. And, of course, we'll get to Golden Dome and what it all means in this big picture.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is Golden Dome? Like, what are they trying to build?
So Golden Dome is a U.S. Space Force project. And their goal, as spacenews.com and dsm.forecastinternational.com report, is pretty huge, literally, to create a missile defense shield over the entire United States.
The entire country. Wow, that's ambitious.
It is. And it's not just one weapon either.
Not like some giant laser beam in space or something.
Yeah. Well, lasers might be part of it, but it's much more than that. It's what they call a system of systems, according to our sources, different technologies working together.
Makes sense. So multiple layers of defense.
Exactly. And designed to tackle all kinds of threats. I mean, think about it, ICBMs, those big intercontinental ballistic missiles, but also things that are newer, faster, harder to hit. Hypersonic missiles, advanced cruise missiles, even drones.
Drones. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. And even stuff coming from orbit, potentially. It's all in the reports from spacenews.com and dsm.forecastinternational.com.
So in a way, it reminds me of Reagan's Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
The SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative.
You were on the money. SpaceNews.com makes that comparison directly. Golden Dome is like a modern take on that idea. And the tech has come a long way since the 80s, obviously. Now they're talking about space-based sensors that can detect launches super early, super fast interceptors that can communicate with each other. And of course, those directed energy weapons, the lasers and microwaves.
So like layers upon layers of protection from space all the way down to Earth.
Exactly. Multiple chances to knock out a threat.
So break it down for me. What are the main pieces of this Golden Dome puzzle? What technologies are they talking about?
All right, so SpaceNews.com and Reuters.com outline a few key elements. First off, they're looking at space-based infrared sensors, basically satellites designed to pick up the heat signature of a missile launch, giving us that early warning and the ability to track it.
Like eyes in the sky, watching for trouble.
Exactly. And SpaceNews.com suggests this would build on existing programs like the Space Development Agency's tracking layer.
Okay, so we see it coming. What next?
Now, this is where it gets really cool. And this is straight out of Reuters.com's space-based interceptors. Like, imagine interceptors or even lasers actually stationed in orbit, ready to take out enemy missiles right as they launch or while they're still flying through space.
That's intercepting missiles from space. It's wild.
It is. And Reuters.com even mentioned that the Pentagon put out a request back in 2025 for companies to propose ideas for these space-based interceptors.
So they're serious about this.
Dead serious. Both kinetic hit-to-kill vehicles and those directed energy platforms are on the table.
So you got space covered. What about closer to home?
Don't worry, they've got that covered too. dsm.forecastinternational.com makes it clear that Golden Dome also relies heavily on integrating all the systems we already have on the ground and at sea.
Right, like Patriot missiles, THAE.
Exactly. And the Aegis system, which is the Navy's big player, the idea is to create this seamless network of defenses with layers upon layers of protection. So even if something slips through one layer, there's another one waiting to take it out.
Okay, so it's not just about building new things in space, but about making all our existing defenses work better together.
Precisely. It's about creating this truly integrated multi-domain system. And yes, those lasers we talked about are part of the equation.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, so dsm.forecastinternational.com mentions non-kinetic defenses. That means things that don't rely on hitting something with a physical projectile.
So lasers, microwaves, that sort of thing.
Right. And the idea is that these could be really effective, especially against swarms of drones or maybe even incoming warheads. And potentially it'll cost less per shot than traditional missiles. They even bring up Israel's Iron Beam laser as an example. That's meant to work alongside their Iron Dome system.
Okay, so lasers could be a big part of this. Are there any other less conventional defenses they're thinking about?
Actually, yeah. DSM.forecastinternational.com points out that Golden Dome isn't just about intercepting missiles in flight. There's this whole concept of defeat prior to launch. That means cyber attacks, electronic warfare, anything to stop those missiles before they even get off the ground.
So it's not just defense, it's offense too.
In a way, yeah. They're trying to be proactive, not just reactive.
Makes sense. So with all these different layers, what kinds of threats are they actually trying to stop?
I'm telling you, the scope is huge. DSM.forecastinternational.com lays it all out. We're talking about everything from those short-range tactical missiles to the ICBMs with nuclear warheads, but it goes beyond that. Hypersonic glide vehicles, those super fast maneuverable weapons that are really hard to hit, those are on the list.
Right, those are in the news a lot these days.
Yeah.
Everyone's worried about them.
And for good reason. Then you've got the advanced cruise missiles flying low and slow under the radar. And then it gets even more interesting. They're even thinking about things like drones, massive drone swarms. And then there's this thing called a fractional orbital bombardment system, FOBS.
FOBS. What in the world is a FOBS?
Yeah, it sounds like something out of science fiction. It's basically a weapon that's put into a partial orbit around the Earth.
What, like a satellite with a bomb?
Pretty much. And the scary thing is, it can approach from any direction, like over the South Pole, which traditional early warning systems aren't really looking out for.
So it could speak up on us.
Exactly. So yeah, they're really trying to cover all the bases here. DSM.forecastinternational.com even calls it an American Iron Dome. You know, like Israel's system, but on a national scale.
Wow, so this is like Iron Dome, but supersized.
Way bigger. I mean, think about it. The U.S. is something like 400 times larger than Israel. So you can imagine the scale of this thing.
That puts it in perspective. Okay, so it sounds like a massive undertaking. But is it just an idea, or are they actually building this thing?
So as of 2025, based on what DSM.forecastinternational.com says, it's still in the planning phase. The Space Force and the Missile Defense Agency are working on the blueprints, figuring out exactly what they need. They were supposed to give an initial plan to the White House back in March 2025, but even senior officials in the Space Force are saying that we're not going to see a fully formed Golden Dome appear overnight. It's going to be built up piece by piece, integrating existing stuff with new developments over time.
Right, so it's going to be a gradual process. It's not like they're going to flip a switch and suddenly we have this impenetrable shield.
Exactly. It's more like a long-term strategy that evolves as technology advances.
So what's the timeline? When can we expect to see some of this stuff actually working?
Well, the timeline from what spacenews.com and Reuters.com say is pretty aggressive. They're hoping to have some basic capabilities up and running by 2026, with more advanced phases rolling out through 2030 and beyond. But, developing big defense systems usually takes way longer, like a decade or more.
Right, it's not like building a website.
Exactly. But the threat of hypersonic missiles and other advanced tech, they're pushing the Pentagon to speed things up. And Reuters.com mentioned they even had these industry days in early 2025, inviting all sorts of companies, defense contractors, SpaceX, even software companies, to pitch ideas for these space-based interceptors and other key parts of the system.
So they're really trying to tap into all the brightest minds to get this thing off the ground.
Exactly. But let's be realistic. Speeding up development on this scale, it's going to cost a fortune.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. What are we looking at cost-wise?
No official numbers yet, but analysts are saying, this is from spacenews.com, tens of billions of dollars, easy. And if they go all in on those space-based weapons, it could be way, way more.
Like hundreds of billions.
Possibly. And this brings back memories of Star Wars. Spacenews.com points that out too. SDI eventually got scaled back because it was just too expensive and the tech wasn't there yet.
Yeah, good old Star Wars. Always an interesting comparison. But what about the rest of the world? What do Russia and China think about all this?
Oh, they're definitely watching and they're not happy about it. Reuters.com specifically reported that Russia basically condemned Golden Dome. They see it as a move to upset the balance of power, maybe even leading to an arms race in space.
Right, because if one country has a really good shield, it changes the whole game.
Exactly. It could make other countries feel like they need to build even more missiles or figure out ways to get through the shield. And even U.S. officials, as reported by spacenews.com, are admitting that perfect defense, like a 100% guarantee, it's probably impossible. So it seems like they're focusing on practical improvements for now, rather than waiting for some ultimate solution that might never come.
So Golden Dome, big idea, lots of layers, could be a game changer, but also expensive and potentially controversial.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like a high-stakes gamble, really.
It is trying to build this huge shield while technology keeps changing so fast.
Okay, well, you mentioned earlier that Golden Dome kind of echoes Reagan's Star Wars, the SDI. Let's talk about that for a bit. What was the whole point of Star Wars? What were they trying to achieve?
So back in 1983, President Reagan announced this thing called the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. And the goal, according to armscontrol.org and FPIF.org, was nothing short of revolutionary: to make nuclear ballistic missiles impotent and obsolete, like literally render them useless.
Impotent and obsolete. That's some strong language.
It was. And it completely challenged the whole idea of mutually assured destruction, which is how the Cold War basically worked. The idea was if both sides could destroy each other, no one would dare attack.
So SDI was trying to break that stalemate.
Yeah.
But how? What were they going to use?
Well, it wasn't just one thing, it was a whole bunch of crazy ideas, all aimed at intercepting those ballistic missiles. I'm talking about lasers, both from the ground and space, particle beam weapons, and these things called orbital interceptors, basically satellites with missiles of their own.
So like a multi-layered defense in space.
Exactly. A shield in space designed to knock out incoming warheads at every stage of their flight.
Space lasers, particle beams, it all sounds like something straight out of a movie. Was any of that actually feasible back then?
Honestly, it was super ambitious, probably even beyond what technology could do back then. Armscontrol.org mentions one idea called brilliant pebbles, which is like having thousands of little interceptors in orbit, each one with its own sensors and thrusters, all ready to slam into warheads. And then there were these giant laser battle stations sitting up in space, zapping missiles as they launched.
It sounds amazing, but also incredibly complicated.
Oh, yeah, it was. And the big problem, as prizewriting.ucdavis.edu points out, is that you need near-perfect accuracy. I mean, thousands of warheads coming in, plus all sorts of decoys to throw off your sensors. Even if just a few get through, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah, that makes sense. A few nuclear warheads getting through is more than enough.
Yeah.
So besides the tech issues, were there other problems with SDI?
Oh, yeah, big time. Armscontrol.org talks about how putting weapons in space would have violated the ABM Treaty, a big agreement between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and it would probably start a whole new arms race, but this time in space.
So a whole new level of tension.
Exactly. The Soviets were freaked out. They saw it as a direct threat. And, you have to remember, this was during the Cold War.
So what happened? Did they ever actually build any of this stuff?
No, not really. It stayed mostly as research. They poured money into it. FPF.org says over $60 billion by the early 90s.
Wow, 60 billion.
Yeah. And for what? A few prototypes, a lot of cost overruns, a bunch of technical dead ends, no space lasers, no orbital interceptors, nothing that really worked.
So kind of a cautionary tale.
Definitely. They learned some hard lessons about how hard and expensive this stuff really is.
But they learned something, right?
Oh, absolutely. They made some important discoveries about sensors, interceptors, even directed energy weapons. And the hit-to-kill technology that's used in a lot of systems today, that got a big boost from SDI research.
So not a total waste.
No.
Yeah.
And, some people argue that SDI, even though it didn't really work, it scared the Soviets enough to make them spend a lot of money trying to counter it. But it also made arms control talks a lot harder.
A mixed bag then.
For sure. But a crucial learning experience.
So SDI was a bold idea targeting those big ICBMs, but in the end, it was just too expensive and the tech wasn't quite there.
Right. And archives.unu.edu mentions these wild cost estimates for a fully deployed system, like hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of dollars.
Trillions. That's more than some country's entire economy.
Yeah, it was massive. But it showed how hard it is to actually hit hundreds of fast-moving targets in space, especially when they can use decoys and other tricks.
So how does all this relate to Golden Dome?
Well, the people behind Golden Dome definitely know about SDI's history. SpaceNews.com even calls it a modern Star Wars. They're hoping that with today's tech, they can succeed where SDI failed. But they also have to be aware of the costs and the challenges. SDI is a good reminder that a perfect shield is really hard to build, and it might be impossible to afford.
So Golden Dome, they're trying to learn from the past,
Yeah.
hoping that technology is caught up. But it's still a huge gamble.
It is.
Okay, so Star Wars was the ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful dream. Let's talk about what we actually have working right now. And I understand that the main idea here is layered defense. What exactly does that mean?
Layered defense is basically having a bunch of different missile defense systems, each one designed to catch a missile at a different point in its flight.
So, multiple chances to take it out.
Exactly. Like having multiple lines of defense, like, protecting a castle.
If one layer fails, there's another one behind it.
Right. Makes it much harder for anything to get through.
So what's the first line of defense in our current setup? I know our sources mentioned something called Ground-Based Midcourse Defense, or GMD.
So GMD right now is our main defense against those really long-range missiles, the ICBMs and IRBMs. It's designed to intercept them during the mid-course phase, which is when they're flying through space after their initial boost.
Okay, so this is a system that's supposed to protect us from, like, a North Korean missile.
Well, sort of, but it's important to understand, and this is straight from armscontrolcenter.org and armscontrol.org, that GMD is really meant for a very specific scenario. A small-scale attack, maybe a handful of missiles.
So not a full-blown nuclear war.
No, definitely not. It's not designed to stop a massive attack from Russia or China, countries with thousands of warheads. It's more about dealing with a rogue state like North Korea or Iran if they were to launch a limited attack.
Okay, that makes sense. So what exactly is GMD made of?
Well, according to armscontrol.org, as of 2023, we have 44 of these things called ground-based interceptors, or GBIs. They're basically big rockets buried in silos, mostly in Alaska at Fort Greely, with a few more at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California.
Then they're just sitting there waiting.
Yep, ready to go in moment's notice. And each GBI carries a special payload, something called an exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, or EKV for short.
Exo-atmospheric, that means it works outside the atmosphere, right?
Exactly. It's designed to hit a warhead in space.
So how does it work? It's not like it has a warhead of its own, right?
No explosives. It's pure kinetic energy. Basically, it slams into the target at an insane speed.
Like a giant bullet hitting another bullet.
Pretty much, but much, much faster and more precise. When a missile launch is detected, the GBI blasts off into space and releases the EKV. Then the EKV uses its own sensors and thrusters to find the enemy warhead and steer right into its path.
So it's basically playing a high-speed game of cosmic billiards.
Uh-huh. In a way, yeah. The impact, at something like 25,000 kilometers per hour, that's enough to obliterate the warhead completely.
That's incredible. But how does the EKV even find the warhead in the vastness of space? You must need some serious help.
Absolutely. GMD has this whole network of early warning and tracking systems working behind the scenes. There's the space-based infrared system, SBRs, which is a bunch of satellites constantly watching for the heat signature of launches.
Okay, so that's the first warning.
Right. And then there are powerful ground-based radars, like the sea-based X-band radar, which is this giant floating radar platform, and the AN/FPS 132 early warning radars.
So they're getting data from all over the place.
Exactly. And all that info gets fed into GMD's fire control centers, which figure out the best intercept trajectory and launch the GBIs.
So it's all happening in real time, a lot of calculations.
Yeah, it's pretty intense, and they often use this shoot, look, shoot approach.
Shoot, look, shoot. What does that mean?
So they fire the first interceptor, watch what happens, see if it hit, and then they can fire a second one if needed, maybe to take out any debris or whatever's left of the threat.
So multiple shots if necessary. Makes sense. But how well does it all actually work? I mean, has GMD ever actually stopped a real missile?
Well, thankfully, it's never had to in a real attack. But they do a lot of testing. And according to armscontrol.org, out of 21 full-scale intercept tests, GMD has successfully hit the target 12 times.
So a little over 50% success rate.
Yeah, but those tests are in very controlled environments with just one target missile and one or two interceptors. It's not the chaos of a real attack. And initially, the Pentagon's own testing office said GMD was only limited capability against even simple ICBMs. Simple. Yeah, ones without all the fancy countermeasures. But then they did a test in 2017 where they actually hit an ICBM-class target, so they upgraded their assessment to demonstrated capability against a basic threat.
Okay, so it can work, but against a limited threat. Has it ever been close to being used for real?
Well, there was that time in 2017 during the whole North Korea situation when they went on partial alert, but nothing actually happened. And the good news is GMD has been getting better in tests. There was one in 2019 where they fired 2 GBIs at a single warhead, and the second one actually hit the debris from the first intercept.
So they're making progress, but I'm guessing there are still some big limitations.
Oh, yeah. And armscontrol.org is pretty clear about this. They say GMD is really only reliable against missiles with simple countermeasures, which means no decoys or fancy maneuvering. Against a modern ICBM that can throw out a bunch of fake warheads, or one with a warhead that can dodge, GMD's chances go way down.
Right, because those decoys, they can fool the sensors.
Exactly. Plus, we only have 44 interceptors right now. If an enemy launches even a small number of missiles, they might need multiple interceptors for each warhead, and suddenly you're running out.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. So GMD, it's like a safety net, but a pretty limited one.
Right. And it's important to remember, as armscontrol.org points out, it's not meant to stop a full-scale nuclear attack. It's more about dealing with those smaller emerging threats, buying us some time.
Okay, so GMD, like a stopgap measure until something better comes along, like maybe that space-based layer of Golden Dome.
Possibly.
All right, let's move closer to Earth. I know we hear a lot about the Patriot missile system. What's its role in all this?
Patriot's a big one. It's been around for a while, super famous from the Gulf War. And according to CSIS.org and missilethreat.csis.org, it's a mobile system used by both the U.S. Army and a lot of our allies. It's basically a radar, a control station, and a bunch of launchers mounted on trucks, all working together.
So they can move it around wherever they need it.
Right. And it was initially designed back in the 70s to shoot down airplanes, but they've upgraded it a lot since then. Now it can also take out short-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, even some pretty advanced aircraft.
A real multitasker. So what kinds of missiles does Patriot use?
Well, the main ones you see today are the PAC-2 and the PAC-3. The PAC-2 is older, it's bigger, and it has a fragmentation warhead, so it explodes near the target and showers it with shrapnel.
Sound messy.
It is, but effective. Then you have the PAC-3, which is newer, smaller, and uses that hit-to-kill technology we talked about. It literally rams into the target. And they have an even newer version called the PAC-3 MSE, which has a bigger engine and can maneuver even better.
So you have the old-school explosive approach and the more modern precision strike.
Exactly. And because the PAC-3s are smaller, a Patriot launcher can carry a lot more of them, like 16 compared to just 4 of the PAC-2s.
So more bang for your buck, literally.
Well, sort of. But yeah, it gives them more flexibility depending on the threat.
So what are those threats exactly? What is Patriot designed to protect against?
CSIS.org and missilethreat.csis.org are pretty clear on that. It's mainly about defending specific locations, military bases, airfields, cities, high-value targets from attack from the air.
So not like GMD, which is trying to protect the whole country.
Right. Patriot's more localized. And when it comes to missiles, it's mostly those short-range ballistic missiles like Scuds, things with a range of maybe 1,000 kilometers or less.
So not the big ICBMs.
No, not those. It's like that middle layer, bridging the gap between longer range systems like THA and Aegis and those very close-in defenses. And we've actually seen it used in combat a lot.
Oh, yeah, I remember Patriot from the news.
Right. It was in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, protecting troops from those Iraqi Scuds. And more recently, CSIS.org and WashingtonInstitute.org mentioned that our allies in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they've been using Patriot a lot against missiles and drones launched by the Houthis in Yemen.
And wasn't Patriot also sent to Ukraine?
Yes, in 2023, to help them defend against Russian missiles and those Iranian-made drones. They even reportedly shot down a Russian Kinzhal missile, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, those are supposed to be really hard to hit. So with all this real-world experience, what's Patriot's track record like? How well does it actually work?
Well, it's a mixed bag. CBSNews.com and DefenseOne.com talk about how, back in the Gulf War in 1991, there was a lot of hype about Patriot's success, but later analysis showed that it wasn't as effective as they initially claimed. But since then, they've made a lot of improvements, especially with the Pussy-3 missiles and better radar software.
So it got better.
Oh, yeah. In the 2003 Iraq War, the Army claimed a 100% success rate against the missiles they engaged. And more recently, those Patriot batteries in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they've been seeing a lot of action. And CSIS.org and WashingtonInstitute.org report really high success rates against those Houthi missiles and drones, like 95% or even better.
Wow, that's impressive. So Patriot's a pretty reliable system.
It seems to be, at least against those kinds of threats. And that Kinzhal intercept in Ukraine shows that it can handle some pretty advanced weapons. But even Patriot's not perfect.
There's always a but, isn't there?
Always. So, CSIS.org points out that a single Patriot battery can really only protect an area about the size of a city, maybe a large military base.
Okay, so not the whole country, like GMD.
No. And even though they're upgrading to a new 360-degree radar, you still have to be smart about where you put them.
Right, you don't want to leave any gaps.
Exactly. Plus, each launcher only carries a limited number of missiles, and reloading takes time. So if you get swarmed by a ton of rockets or drones all at once, Patriot can be overwhelmed.
That makes sense. Too many targets, not enough interceptors.
Right. And it's also expensive,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about those cheaper drones.
Right, using a $1 million missile to shoot down a drone that costs a few thousand, that's not a good trade-off.
Exactly. So as CSIS.org explains, they have rules of engagement to make sure Patriot is only used against the most important threats.
Okay, so Patriot, good for protecting specific areas, but not a cure-all.
Right. It's a vital last line of defense, but it has to be used strategically.
Okay, makes sense. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about a system that's gotten a lot of attention for its effectiveness. Israel's Iron Dome. What exactly is Iron Dome designed to stop?
Iron Dome is basically Israel's answer to those constant rocket attacks they've been facing. It's designed for those smaller, cheaper projectiles, the kinds of things launched by groups like Hamas.
So not the big ballistic missiles.
No, not those. More like rockets, artillery shells, mortars, stuff that's relatively simple, but can still cause a lot of damage and casualties.
Right, those rockets, they're not very sophisticated, but they can still be deadly.
Exactly. And that's why Israel developed Iron Dome. It's been operational since 2011, and it's gotten a lot of praise for how well it protects Israeli cities from these attacks.
I remember seeing videos of it intercepting rockets. It's pretty amazing.
It is, and it was born out of necessity. Back in 2006, during the Lebanon War, Hezbollah fired over 4,000 rockets into Israel.
Wow, 4,000.
Yeah, and their existing defenses just couldn't handle it. So they realized they needed something new, something specifically designed for these kinds of attacks.
And that's how Iron Dome was born.
Yeah.
So how does it actually work?
Well, according to Britannica.com and missiledefenseadvocacy.org, it has three main parts: a really advanced radar, a control system that makes all the decisions, and then the launchers for the interceptors.
Okay, so the radar sees the incoming rockets.
Right. Tracks them, figures out where they're going, and then the control system takes over. It crunches the numbers, figures out the rocket's trajectory, where it's going to land.
And I read somewhere that it can actually decide which rockets to ignore.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things about it. Britannica.com explains how Iron Dome has this really clever discrimination logic. If it calculates that a rocket is headed for an empty area, it won't bother.